Our moonlit journey takes us to a lonely tower, abandoned to spiders and time. Ancient mementos and skulls teeter on the edge of eroding shelves. Strange skulls mark out a staircase never meant for human feet, all too steep and blocky to be wholly of human make. An altar, nearly wrapped in spider webs, greets us with candles of what we can only hope is wax. Welcome to the Nightmare Tower. I want to prelude this with I love how this piece came together. It was a revelation building this thing and actually getting into the correct headspace for building terrain where it just flows. To start with, I want to talk about the use of multimedia in hobby builds. It's nothing. There's nothing to fear, yet I did fear it when I came into crafting this piece. I wasn't sure what I was doing exactly. I started with a simple tower frame built out of balsa wood, and then getting that onto a base of XPS foam. The idea I had was that the tower was going to be built into the natural stone itself rather than placed on top of it. At the time, I didn't feel like using XPS to carve and texture foams for this base, and I elected to pull out some plaster cast rocks. These mold are really cheap, definitely worth getting, and you can get a lot of plaster, a Paris or hydrocal in bulk for basically next to nothing. Just a small note to remember to use a mold release of some kind. It's a pain to clean some of these up afterwards when you forget to put it in. With these plaster rocks, I ended up using a combination of Sculptamold and super glue to keep them in place as I kind of worked my way around and laid out the larger shape of my tower. With the Sculptamold setting and holding the cast rock in place, I just had to get the interior done. This needed to be large enough for minis to go into, and that's when I started to get ambitious. Yeah, this is when I outthought myself. I wanted this entire set to be modular, so I could connect up to other similarly themed pieces of terrain, but definitely more on that later. Uh, with the inserted base created and laid out in the very roughest terms, I was ready to start thinking about the decoration for this. Uh, the first place I went was to my bits from my Warhammer and AOS Death Armies. I just started pulling heads, swords, shields, the altar piece, whatever looked good and was attention grabbing. The idea was that this place was going to be a memorial mausoleum with bits of bones and various tokens and mementos that had been left behind by visitors. The flat planes of these wood panels gave me the idea to use some XPS foam and create something of a shelf that could then be deliberately ripped to show the age and the overall decay of the tower. That's as far as I got with the construction for weeks. Every time I saw the piece, I disliked it. There was something else about it every time that was wrong. Until one day I found the answer. When I was popping out some new pieces of plaster cast rocks, on a whim, I put them up in front of the tower. And that was when the piece spoke to me. It said it was never meant to be a modular piece of terrain. It was a statement in stone. And I took that the only way I possibly knew. Megalithic stairs. This is a new experience for me. It really is, but it felt right as I was putting it together. If your terrain speaks to you like art, why not hit that like button and subscribe to join your fellow rock speaker? the The plaster cast once again served as the base pieces, and then with the Sculptamold and some more hot glue, I kept on assembling the steps and the rock face itself. To reduce the amount of Sculptamold I needed to fill these large areas, I ended up using some scrap foam to just fill in the space below the steps themselves. It ended up saving a lot of time, a lot of Sculptamold, and reducing the overall weight. Just make sure to texture and cut the pieces that are on the top if they are still exposed. The lower corner here was looking a little sparse as I was building out the rock face, so I decided to create something of a um, warrior shrine out of a collection of other bits and spare cast off resin prints that I had laying around. I thought it was fitting that there would be somewhere that the weapons of the dead would be placed in honor without approaching the steps themselves. This creates kind of a sense of the sacred space in a way that makes the build more interesting to look at from all sides. Keep this in mind because we'll be coming back to this idea of creating sacred spaces in your terrain with the other parts of this set. So I left it to dry overnight and came back the next day to a bit of disappointment. There were large areas on those flat panels that just needed something. The hack job I had done on the various stonework of the tower itself wasn't the most realistically stable, but I devised a way around that to more or less make the piece come together and address both of my issues at once. Cardstock. Cardstock cut into long strips. These can be easily made and painted up as metal bands with next to no work. So these went in directly underneath the shelves and around the corners in a way binding all of the stonework together. To add a little bit of detail to it, I ended up taking a bit of green stuff and forming some bolts to stand in as anchors, if you will. The entryway would be framed in the same manner to make it more eye-catching, but I decided at this point against putting any markings in the center of it. The way I figure it, the age of this tower is so great that any inscription above the door probably would have faded a long time ago. And so I ended up returning to the decorations and getting those shelves filled. For this, I found I needed a little bit more. So I turned on my ePax resin printer, ran off a few interesting skulls of varying sizes, some pottery, both whole and broken, a few extra shields and weapons just because. Like most people, I ended up basing this entire piece in black initially. The idea behind this was to keep the same cool blue color that I've used in my previous Bloodborne build seen here. The stonework is nothing fancy with this theme that I'm going for, and the texture is the real highlight here. The way the foam is textured, the coffee grounds, the small nicks in the stone do a lot of the speaking. Over the black base, the worked stone got a gray, heavy dry brush, followed up by a lighter gray, and then capped off with a light white. The coffee ground texture was done much later on, and that was just given a quick brush of tan and then a brush of off-white. Then I turned to the natural rock walls. These got the blue-gray coating, followed up by the same gray that I hit hit the stone with. This helps to tie all the stone together and helps to build up that cool blue color. These were then hit with, similarly to the stone, just another shade of gray, a shade of white. Let's talk about the wash process. Uh, it would have been easy just to go straight for the black, but I decided I wanted to capture some of that otherworldly color that you get in some of the nightmares in Bloodborne. Something that's just slightly off from the normal. That's why I reached, instead of for the black wash, for the purple and the green brown wash. And I would later come in with a black to help with the depth and blend everything together. By not coating the entire thing and just doing drops and streaks and moving and working the washer around, you can control the color change of your highlights. And this definitely helps when you need to hide some of the places where you got a little overly zealous with the dry brushing, or where you nicked it with other colors of paints. But the amount of blue in the piece, I decided it definitely needed the green brown to counter that and kind of pull it back into some form of even. We're given the metal details and the metal panels of the tower themselves were given a quick coat of hammered copper from Army Painter, and then a quick, very diluted green wash over them to age them. The vases and the pots were also given a yellow-brown base coat that later got some of the dark wash, followed up by a tan to create a kind of Neolithic yellow-looking clay. These skulls, the skull piles, and the hands holding their weapons were based with bone white, then given a coat of skeleton bone contrast paint, and then highlighted back up with bone white. Nice and simple, didn't want to put too much work and time into these guys. The weapons, the shields, the metal circlets on some of the skulls got a quick coat of gunmetal, followed up by the dark wash, and then just a quick dry brush of silver to make them pop from everything else. It was nearly done, but it still had some rough spots. The size and scale and the sheer amount of stuff will allow the viewer's eye to forgive you if you don't necessarily hit everything. That said, there were definitely some rough spots on this. That's why I decided to pull out the old cotton balls and create some interesting spider nests. So the way you do this is you rip up your cotton balls into little pieces. You place the watered down cotton ball glue mix wherever you need to hide it, and you just work that out with a piece of wood, a pair of tweezers, anything like that. It forms some pretty interesting looking spider nest and definitely sells the idea that this is an abandoned tower while allowing you to hide those painting gaps or those small mistakes. Just keep working that cotton ball and then using something like your finger or a stick to push down and get it into the cracks, much like how a spider would build its nest over time. And there we have it, one Bloodborne themed tower. With the otherworldly colors and the spider webs, it fits really nice into the theme of an abandoned occult tower. The rock color is just different enough that I could see it fitting into even Bergenworth itself, perhaps somewhere near the lake. With this project completed, my new favorite part, other than this piece, is what will come from this piece in the future. I had scrapped the original plan for a roof and a couple other pieces that were in the modular design and left it open because this sucker is getting an upper level. This is only the start of a collection of themed terrain of what I'm going to call the Nightmare set. An upper tower, a bridge that will connect the old upper tower to another piece, an occult feasting hall, rock-cut tombs, a temple-like approach, and a throne for the nightmare itself. That's all coming with a number of small micro builds that I plan on doing, like some Bloodborne coffin stacks, perhaps some broken marble benches, that kind of thing, and various bits of scatter like that. So if any of that fires your imagination, hit the like button and subscribe because you will want to be following this nightmare to the end. Leave a comment with the most inspiring bit of Bloodborne's architecture to you, and maybe we'll be able to work it into the next piece. We walk deeper, Hunter. Are you prepared to face the nightmare?